I
Hello.
okay. Yes, I don't know what's happened.
Yeah, Skype will do that.
Yes, yes.
So,
Okay.
and I don't see you, but can you see me? As long as you can hear me.
Yes. Yes, yes, let me see my. Okay, here's my camera.
Yeah, there you are. So, the as I was saying, I don't know how much of it you got before we got cut off, but my reading of the history in the U.S. is that writing centers were tied to enrollment patterns. So, as the access to U.S. higher education broadened, and it did in a bunch of different time periods, starting in the 1890s. Suddenly, students were far less prepared than previous generations. They were far different. They were much more working class. They had come through public schools rather than elite private schools. So as that access broadened, and that access has broadened pretty much from around 1890 to around 1980. I mean, it really was over 90 to 100 years of that access. It's somewhat stabilized now, but it continues. I mean, it isn't the case that 100% of high school graduates go to college in the U.S. Um, I don't even know what the figure is now, but it went from a very small figure to a relatively large figure. I think it's in the 70% range now. So as those students came to U.S. higher education, their reading and writing and communication skills were sometimes deficient in a way, and so that's the sort of ties to remediation. I think sometimes they were just different. I think there's lots of class and socioeconomic reasons for that. That these students communicated in different ways than the faculty were used to, and the way the faculty did. The access was broadened socioeconomically. So I think writing centers were one response to that movement around literacy, and a kind of I mean, I think it's an institutional response, and when I say that, I mean that institutions as a sort of whole entity often feel like they need to do something.
Yeah.
They don't always want to commit to solve the problem, but they feel like they need to do something. And sometimes it's almost peer pressure, right? They see other
Yeah.
institutions. Oh, you have a writing center. We need one too.
Yeah.
So I think that was part of the phenomenon as well. Um,
Oh.
though though I mean when I say the institutionalized writing centers, I think there's been some kind of writing support in maybe fairly informal ways, as long as there's been higher education in this country, right? And maybe it was just informal tutoring, maybe it was some students taking their own initiative to do peer review, but there's been something. But that sort of institutional response, something that we would recognize as a writing center, and that, as you said, right, then we have to find someone to be an administrator, and then that person plays a role in this and has a certain status within the institution, and all those kinds of factors. Those become important, and my tracing of it is it really isn't until around the 1930s in this country that there were that model became more widespread.
Okay. Okay. So in Latin America also there are the same reason, this remedial
Yep.
reason, but at this point many people studying writing center consider that this still the reason to create a writing center, because you need to put this student with language deficiency
Yeah.
in the same point of the others. But I don't know, Dr. Lerner, this is still the reason, because I heard that there are some college studying writing centers yet, and you can see in the mail list that we have a new writing center. So what is the reason to create writing centers at this moment.
That's a great question. Yeah.
I think it's not the same
Yeah.
reasons in the 1930s that
Yep.
was. Uh-huh.
I think there's lots of reasons in this moment. I think it's a great point. How and it kind of gets to how U.S. higher education has changed, and I'm sure that's true for Latin America as well. And there's the one of the phenomenon in this country is that many new writing centers are coming out of larger centers for academic support. So, in other words, rather than coming out of an English department or a writing program with a kind of academic side to it, and those are often tied to particular courses in this country, first year writing most notably, or first year composition. And writing centers are kind of a support mechanism for that and the students in those courses. So the ones that are coming out of academic support, those are often part of larger tutoring centers that have math tutoring and physics tutoring,
Yeah.
whatever subject, right? And they have study skills. They have sometimes they have all kinds of programming that support students, and they come out of the student affairs side of the university, which is in this country quite different than the academic. I think that's a relatively, I mean, it's something that's been going on in this country for at least 25 years, but I think the sort of recognition that students need support services in that kind of way, and those run from mental health services to academic to social, and writing centers are one piece of that.
Uh-huh. One of those
Yeah,
services.
one of those services. So I think that explains some of the continued growth. Not all of it, but just some of it. Though there's been lots of, it seems, some writing centers that were part of departments are now part of these larger student support centers. And I think that's partially just efficiency of an organization saying, why do we need all these different things? Let's all bring them together
Okay.
under one roof. I don't know whether that's good or bad, but another phenomenon along those lines is a lot of writing centers, new writing centers or old writing centers, are being shifted and are doing collaborations with libraries in this country. And I'd be curious how if that's happening in Latin America as well. And so libraries, which have always been about, they've always been about student support and academic support, right? So it just makes sense it's a partnership that makes a lot of natural sense. So so it can be a physical partnership. There's lots of writing centers now housed in the campus library. And then there's other kinds of support where the library personnel and the writing center personnel are working closely together to support students around research, around finding sources, about how to use sources, and then how to write about sources. So it's another one of those partnerships that just makes a lot of sense. So can I ask you one question? So a colleague of mine, former colleague of mine, good friend of mine, who's still at MIT, Jennifer Craig, she's done some work, particularly in Mexico. And she had, we were talking about this a while back, that there was a phenomenon in the 1970s in Mexican higher education, and in some other countries as well in South America, but mostly in Mexico, called self-access centers. I don't know what it would be called in Spanish, so I don't know if that helps you at all. It was
No. Yeah,
it was
I
a
heard
model that was imported from the United Kingdom. And it was kind of like a language lab for learning.
my college used to have.
Oh yeah,
Yes, my college used to have, and they call us. I don't remember the nickname,
yeah.
but they
Sounds like
used
you're
to
right.
have it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it was mostly materials. I mean, we had the same thing in this country for learning languages other than English, which was tapes and books. And you went in, you put on headphones, and you
Yeah.
learned language. And there was some. I don't know if it still exists, but there was some attempt particularly in the 70s, as I said, to do that around writing. And I'm not sure what it looked like. I thought, well, that's an interesting history that someone should write about or research.
Yes.
But
Yes.
hey, my Spanish isn't good enough to be able to.
But you can improve it.
That's true.
No, as I know, it's just for second language learning.
Yeah.
It was just for second language learning, as until I know, and I talked with a lot of college in different countries, and there are no kind of laboratory with writing.
I see. I see.
They didn't exist.
So it was just oral
Nobody told me.
communication then.
Yeah,
Uh-huh.
yeah, it's just, but at the same time with books, written communication, but just in second language.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I see.
it both.
Yeah. Because you
Yes,
think
yes.
in some ways, for some, if there were institutions that did it really well, right, that infrastructure would be there, and maybe that could evolve into
Uh-huh.
a writing center in ways we might recognize it. But
No, no, we don't have this line of
uh-huh.
evolution with a previous laboratory and now a writing center. We no. They they used to start with regular courses
Uh-huh.
in first semesters with different approach because our theoretical approach in Latin America are very different.
I see.
We don't have any rhetoric and composition.
Uh-huh.
The main focus are in linguistics,
Yep.
in text linguistics,
Yep.
in systemic functional
Yeah.
linguistics, discourse analysis, and so on. So, uh, people who are teaching writing at college are most of them linguistics.
Yep.
Most of them are linguistics. This is the main background.
Sure.
What I'm trying to do as a result of my research is to create kind of certificate program to encourage the writing centers and writing programs directors
Mm-hmm.
to have a common background about what is
Yeah,
administration of
that
a
sounds great.
writing
Yeah.
program. That's what I'm trying to do at some point of my life.
Yeah, that sounds like a great plan. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I was at a conference last month around supporting graduate students, and it was interesting because about half the people came from language and second language research and second language support and that area, and about the other half are from composition and rhetoric, and it was a large point of it was just to sort of look at how much overlap there was between, I mean, in both areas, the idea they're about writing centers or other kinds of writing programs to support students, specifically graduate students. But and since so many graduate students in this country are native speakers of languages other than English, it made a lot of sense that that those folks would have that kind of interest. But
We have one case in Buenos Aires, in Argentina.
hmm
They have a writing center just for graduate
hmm
students.
hmm
This is the only that I know in Latin America, just a graduate writing center.
hmm
Most of our writing centers are graduate undergrad, and if a graduate student come to the writing center, they serve them as well.
hmm
But this is the only case. I heard that in some college there are universities that have a graduate writing center and an undergrad writing
Yeah,
center.
yeah.
So
It's
I think the tutors have different backgrounds
yeah,
and
yeah,
not
yeah.
not.
And I mean, they're not really common, but I think that trend is growing in this country to have writing centers specifically for graduate students.
For
And
graduates.
you're right, the staffing is usually different. Um, and there's other ways in which they just can do different activities, I think, other than tutoring
Yeah,
that for graduate
yeah.
students, that graduate students might need.
Okay. I want to ask you about the writing center director. As I told you, this is one of my focus in my research,
Yeah.
and I want to know because this is not much in publishing. I can't found too much about what was the evolution of the role of the writing center director. How start this position? If they are just professors at the beginning, and how was this evolution, and how is in this moment?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I've written a couple of things on that that I'm glad to send you. They're probably hard for you to find because they're somewhat obscure, but I'll send those to you.
Oh, yeah.
It's a
Thank
question
you.
it's a question I've always really been interested in too. So I don't think it's an evolution like
Uh-huh.
I think it's really like that. And so some of the early writing centers the directors were faculty who were sort of doing it in addition to whatever else they were doing. But also some of the early writing centers, they were just people hired for some reason. Sometimes they were a spouse of a faculty member. Sometimes they just seemed to have some sort of expertise, and they were just put in a position to run a writing center. I think that's a great not great. I don't know. It's a sort of major tension that runs throughout the history of writing centers. Is the way I see it. Is the question of should the administrator or should the writing center director be a faculty member with faculty member status or a non-faculty person? And so, but even the answer to that is complicated, I think. So, I mean, I've been in the role of a writing program administrator who was a faculty member and who was not a faculty member. And at the institutions where I was playing that role, I would much rather be a faculty member. And when I say faculty member, I mean someone who's on the tenure track or has tenure and is in that has that status within the institution. Um, so in some of the surveys that have been done in this country of this institutional status of writing center directors, the numbers are kind of all over the place because the data are kind of crazy. There was a fairly recent survey that I think is going to be a little more reliable, and I'm not sure what it says, but the numbers are still pretty uneven in terms of how many writing center directors occupy tenure track faculty positions or tenured faculty positions, and how many don't. I think that evolution, and that's why I say it's kind of all over the place, because I know of places where the writing center director was a faculty member, that person leaves, retires, whatever, and then they hire a staff person, a non-faculty person. And I've heard when I got hired in my current university, I was hired as a writing center director and a faculty member, and I was the first in 30 years of that writing center. I was the first faculty tenure track writing center director. So things change at different. It seems like a very
You
institutional.
know both sides of the history.
Yeah. I mean, institutions have, as since I'm a faculty member. I mean, I know institutions. It's a lot easier to create positions that are non-faculty. They cost less. Institution makes a much shorter commitment or less of a commitment to the position when they do that in this country. And so in some ways they're easier to get, right? So if people in the institution are trying to create a writing center and get a director, they probably have a better shot at it if not hiring a faculty tenure track person. And I think that rise of the student success centers or student support centers, and then writing center directors coming out of those entities, they're usually, the history of those centers in this country is not that they're run by faculty. They're run by specialists who who don't have that kind of academic degree because they don't need to. That's not where they're coming from. So those entities won't hire a faculty member to run a writing center. It would be pretty unlikely. So they're like those both worlds are operating simultaneously in this country.
And at this currently, there are, as you say, there are some writing center directors with no graduate background, with no and I think this is an obstacle
Yeah.
if they don't have a degree in rhetoric composition or something specialized, even more specialized in WPA or in writing center studies.
Hmm.
And can you imagine what's happening in Latin America when we don't even have a common core of education?
Hmm.
And I am curious about how do affect to don't have an educational background to support you in your job of writing center director. Is this really an obstacle? If a writing center director doesn't have any background about rhetoric, about writing
Sure.
center
Yeah.
studies, is this an obstacle?
I mean, I think not always, but there's a bigger chance of someone not doing a very good job.
Yeah.
Because I mean, I work with faculty, and I have for years across the curriculum on teaching with writing in their courses, and not all those people have training or experience on teaching with writing in some way or another. Some of them still do a good job. They had good instincts, or that
Mm-hmm.
they themselves learned to write in ways that they're applying to how to teach others how to write. And so they
Mm-hmm.
know, well, let's see, writing is a process. So people need to
Mm-hmm.
revise.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah.
Or I should give feedback that isn't just correcting grammar, and maybe it'll be more effective.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a few principles that they learn themselves because they've had good instruction that they can then apply to their students. But to depend on that isn't a very good
Mm-hmm.
plan for success.
Yes.
And that's
Yeah.
why there's training. I mean, I mean, it's not as if every writing center director in this country is a star and knows what they're doing. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I've been at meetings of particularly regional meetings,
Mm-hmm.
and there are people there who are running writing centers who really don't have much background in it. I mean, it's still the case that some even places where it's a faculty writing center director, they'll choose the institution will choose a faculty member from some random discipline almost. And
Mm-hmm.
I don't
Mm-hmm.
know, it's that person's turn. Go run the writing center. And they usually, I mean, they think, well, I don't know what I'm doing. So they'll turn to colleagues at other places and say, what should I do? So I would hope at some of the institutions
Mm-hmm.
you're looking at.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
is there now? I know there was some talk of it, but is there now a writing centers, a Latin America Writing Centers Association, where people can have colleagues and resources and ask you
We are,
these?
yes, we're working on that. We have one association. Is not called an
I see.
association, but a network.
Uh huh.
As a network, I am the director
Uh huh.
of this
Great.
network,
Good for you.
and we just have two conferences.
Oh, great.
The first one was in 13, and the second was last year in Bogota,
Uh
here in
huh.
Colombia.
Great.
But there are people from Mexico, from Ecuador, from Venezuela, Argentina, Chile, Uruguay,
That's great.
and we
Yeah.
are trying to create an academic community
Yeah.
to create a sense. What I'm trying to help to understand is, are we different than U.S. Writing Center? If we are different, what are our
Yeah.
differences?
Great question.
What are our identity?
Yeah.
That's something that I pretend to, as a final point in my research. I try to, are we different? Are we
Yeah.
really different?
Yeah.
I really think that we are different, but I can't explain why
Yeah. I
in
mean,
this moment.
the thing I would wonder about, because I mean, it's really the way I think about writing centers in this country, is they're a kind of reflection of their institution, of their university, or their college, or their university, right? So there's a lot of differences because of that. Not all universities are the same, but they're patterns. So I would wonder, in any of the writing centers that you're looking at in Latin America, is the if they're different than what's going on in the U.S., is the function of higher education different? Is what students are being prepared for or educated for, or who's being educated? How open access is it? What kind of careers are people being prepared for, or what kinds of whether it's particular kinds of professional skills or larger kind of general education things like civics training and be a good citizen and all the rest, right? So I would wonder how the institutional purposes and the purposes of helping students learn to write, how those are feeding each other in one way or another, or not, because that could be an interesting tension too. So since I don't know anything about, I only know a little about U.S. higher education. I know nothing about U.S. higher education in any other country, much less an entire region like Latin America.
But the main difference in Latin America, is really different. A private college
Yeah.
than a public college.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
two completely different things. And in a private college, the focus in some, for example, there are some private college as analogous of Harvard, that they are preparing the people who are going to govern us.
Yep.
In those cases, the idea of what are the students doing with writing is so different than in other college, even private college. There are private college who are preparing students to work in so they are working a lot in Colombia, at least in entrepreneurship. They are preparing to get with new business.
Yep.
Some others are preparing students to work in a industry, they are different conceptions of why do we need writing.
Yep.
Why do our students need writing? In public university, the sense is more critical, and they are preparing for citizenship. Is more is a broader conception, I think.
Sure.
And those courses, you can see differences but the way that they traditionally are doing is in regular courses, in first semesters, and in those courses in public university, they work with a broader. For example, they work writing at the beginning, biographies or self biography, much with the idea of writing to understand me, and to explain to the others. And they have a different thing. For example, in my college, we work at the beginning with academic writing, and the kind of write that they need to survive in college. There are different point of view depending on the institution. It's most of them in the institution. It's depending on the institution. I think.
Interesting. Yeah. And that's an interesting way to think of it, right? The different types of institutions, creating different kinds of with different needs, and then administratively creating different kinds of writing centers as a result.
And for my research, this is interesting because this put a different reason to create a writing center.
Definitely.
But there are institutions, there are colleges who start that they start a writing center because the other start a writing center as well. So it's working. Okay, let's do this.
Yeah. I mean,
yes.
I mean, there's a certain way I always think about this, right? I mean, if I could ask any one of my colleagues, do you think we should? It would be a good goal to have our students write more effectively. Like, no one's going to say no to that. Like, no, we don't want to do that. Everybody says yes to that. So, in some ways,
Yes.
it's easy to conceive of the need for writing
Yeah.
support. Writing's
Yeah.
hard. What keeps people like us with jobs?
Yeah, that is true. And in your experience, Dr. Lerner, or in what you heard, when when the writing centers were starting, what was the main obstacles that they had to face? What was it was political pressures. O sea,
Yeah,
what kind
questions.
of uh-huh.
Yeah, yeah, and I'm only going to speculate because I don't when I've tried to trace the early writing centers in the U.S. for the ones what I've never looked at, which is a great question, for the ones that went away, like why, like what caused them to fail in a sense, or just I mean I know of a couple, but I don't know how widespread those trends are. So a lot of the early writing centers in this country started as classes. So a student would sign up for a class called Writing Laboratory,
Mm-hmm.
and in that, and so it was part of their regular schedule, and you could that makes sense, right? That it fits in with how we're thinking of students, and they take classes. Okay, here's another class you're going to take. This one's
Mm-hmm.
going to be called Writing Laboratory. Well, it's going to be different than other classes in that when you're
Mm-hmm.
there during this set time period, you'll be conferencing with someone. You'll be getting one-to-one writing feedback with someone, and in those writing laboratories, usually work was assigned. It was relatively unusual in these early ones that students would bring work from other classes, which is how we
Mm-hmm.
think of writing centers today, right? So they'd
Mm-hmm.
come to the writing center and they had a curriculum. They'd say, okay, go write this, and then come talk to me and I'll give you feedback. And there
Mm-hmm.
were like 40 students in a room doing this.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think that model wasn't sustainable, um,
Okay.
partially because I would guess two things. One is, well, if it was under the assumption that there's these sort of generalized writing skills, and so a
Uh-huh.
student could do wonderful things in the confines of that writing laboratory, but then they have to write something in one of their classes that's completely different, and they're
Mm-hmm.
struggling. I mean, we see that all the time, right?
Mm.
And so
Yeah.
it suddenly it's like, why didn't they learn to write in the writing laboratory? So I
Mm-hmm.
think that model might not have been particularly effective for that reason. And they were always understaffed. I mean, it was like one person with 40 students at a time.
Mm. Yes.
And I
Yes.
studied the writing laboratory at the University of Minnesota that was in this model and started in 1932.
Mm-hmm.
And I did some archival work there, and there was a whole series of letters from the writing memos from the writing center director to the head of the program complaining about his workload constantly.
Oh, you
Like, I
get
can't take it
this.
anymore. I need help. I need help. And he finally retired, and they had a big party for him, and there were jokes made about how hard he had to work. So I think it just wasn't sustainable in that kind of model. Um,
Okay.
so in some ways, that's why it's changed. And it wasn't. I mean, the idea of peer staffed writing center
Uh-huh.
was is relatively late in this country. It really isn't until the 1960s that kind
Oh,
of took off.
the peer tutoring.
Yeah, where peer tutoring
Oh.
really took off.
Oh.
And I think once that happened, then it was the labor issues were sort of worked out because there was a lot of cheap labor.
Uh-huh. Yeah. And do you think that these improve the writing center services when they start with peer tutoring?
I do, yeah, I do.
Mm-hmm.
I think
Yeah.
there's so much value in peer-to-peer collaboration that
Mm-hmm.
only happens in peer-to-peer collaboration. Uh,
Mm.
that's not simply about writing. That's about institutional knowledge and cultural knowledge
Yeah.
and all kinds of other things
Mm-hmm.
that's really valuable. And it's not going to happen otherwise.
Mm-hmm.
So I think
Okay.
I think that really was a key moment in this country's
Mm.
writing centers. So how
Yes.
common is that in the Latin American writing centers that you've seen?
Most of the writing centers work with peer
I say
tutoring.
great. Yeah, that's,
Yes, most of them work. Yeah, yes, and I just know one writing center who are working with faculty
hmm
as a tutors,
hmm
but the rest of them are with peer
that's
tutoring.
great. Yeah, that's
And
good.
I was asking you about that because one thing that I read a lot, but I want to see what were the mistake
hmm
that we don't have to do the same, to trying to okay pay attention to that and
Yeah.
don't do that, and learn about the other
Uh,
experiences.
I mean, one of the things that I've read about in, looking at historically, like issues around space and adequate space are constant. You
Hmm.
And
You know that this is the main obstacle right now for our writing center. This
that's
is our
amazing.
main obstacle.
That's amazing. I mean, it's hard to understand in a way, right? I mean, if you think, right, we need students to eat, let's build a cafeteria. We need a library, let's build a library. Like, why not
Yeah,
build a writing center? Why does it not occur to people to
yeah.
do that?
Yes, yes, yes. This is the main issue. I think that my colleagues they agree in this the same point.
It's
Is about the
interesting.
space.
Yeah,
It's about we don't have any space, or we have a too small
yeah,
space. We can tutor in more than one person at the time, and those kind of thing. This
yeah,
is
yeah.
this
I
yes.
think that's why I had mentioned those collaborations with libraries. I think
Hmm.
that's one of the driving factors with them
Yeah.
is there's space there. So
And maybe these for this reason some of those writing centers are moving to learning centers to because of space,
yeah,
because they
yeah,
need another conditions
yes,
to work
yeah,
with. Let's talk about IWCA,
yeah,
who was at the beginning NWCA.
correct, yeah.
What was the main changes that's happened in writing centers when they create this association? How this association improve support? How are there any changes when IWCA or NWCA start?
It's a great question. Um, I wasn't there at the start. I'm not that old, but there
Yeah,
are
I know.
those. Joyce Kincaid wrote an article about
Kincaid.
this. Yeah. So I think it may in the same way that your network is playing a role. I mean, I think it played a similar role. It gave people who were doing similar kinds of work opportunities to have conversations, to learn from each other. Um, and I mean, the thing that has always been hard for me to know, and I've worked. I mean, I've been part of the IWC, first NWCA and then IWCA for many years. I was treasurer twice. Um, and so I have felt a commitment to the professional organization. It's always hard to know if it matters to anyone outside of the people who are members. So in other words, does my institution care? Does my university care about that professional organization? And I never quite know the answer to that. Right.
Yeah.
So one example of that is there's been conversations over many years now about whether the IWCA should do some sort of certification process that
Uh-huh.
Writing Center can apply to be certified by the
Uh-huh.
professional organization. And one of the arguments for that has been like, okay, that'll give me some credibility with my dean or my provost or my chair or whatever. And I'm skeptical, truthfully, that I mean, I know lots of dean provosts and chairs, and I'm not convinced
Yeah.
they're impressed by such things. I don't think it hurts, but it's a lot of pieces to be put in place for that particular function. So I mean, it's not the same way that some professional organizations for other fields play certain kinds of roles, right? Where they certify professionals, and you can't practice unless you're certified, whether like for doctors and lawyers.
Yeah.
or for teachers for that matter. So I think the professional organization has done lots of good things. And continues to do lots of good things, and can drive conversations in certain ways. I think lots of the current movements around research are driven in lots of ways by the professional organization, and the journals, which are part of the professional organization. But I'm still trying. I'm still trying to figure out what all of the benefits potentially are and how best to take advantage of them.
Yes, because one of my questions was how 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 can a writing center benefit becoming part of
It's a
IWCA
great
or
question. Yeah,
not becoming part?
yeah.
How can they do different things? I think that when you become part of one of those organizations, you can be part of the conversation.
Hmm.
You can interchange in the conferences. And I, in my experience, I learned a lot in those. I went to the last two IWCA
Hmm.
conferences,
Hmm.
and I learned a lot during these conferences. I think if for the writing center director who goes to the conferences, it's a learning experience. It's a great learning experience, and I don't know if this director do transfer knowledge to the writing center,
Yeah,
to their
yeah.
tutors,
Great
to the
question.
work team. Uh, it could be benefit. It could be beneficial
Hmm.
to them.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. I mean, I agree, and I mean, I think what's interesting. One thing that you said made me think of it is, and when I was treasurer, I used to get this question all the time. I mean, the IWCA has members,
Uh huh.
individuals, right, writing center
Yeah.
directors or and tutors. But I used to get asked, like, can my writing center itself be a member? And it's like it's not really set up for that. It has to be tied
Yeah.
to a person. So
Yeah.
how the writing center itself might benefit, I think, is a really interesting question. I don't think it's really set up to
Mm-hmm.
do that. It's set up to respond to what individuals' needs are, rather
Yeah.
than kind of collective needs. I don't know what it would look like if
Yes.
for the centers as a whole, but it would be interesting to think about what that might look like.
Yes. Yes.
But
It's
I certainly agree. The
interesting.
conference, running a conference, has been the best thing that the
Yeah.
IWCA has done.
Yes. Yes. I think so. Uh, something that I'm asking in this moment is about the ethos of a writing center, uh, because I had some discussions with my colleagues about if we are servers or we are
Mhm.
scholars. You know
Yeah.
what I mean?
Yep.
And in some cases, we are known in our college because we do workshops to serve another classes, and our academic work as a faculty member is not well known. And this is something that I'm really asking in this moment about: are we our service? I don't know if is in English is well
No,
say a
yes,
serve
yes,
unit
yeah.
or
Service
our
unit,
academic unit.
right? That's definitely been the tension forever, in U.S. writing centers. And I can't resolve it. I don't have an easy answer. But I think, I mean, I could. When you mentioned doing workshops, right? Almost always when I do workshops, I try to include some content that comes from research about how
Of
students
course.
learn to write or what we know, or even if it's my own research, to
Hmm.
and that's my attempt to say, well, there's an intellectual foundation for what we're talking about here. People aren't just making this up. So, I want
Hmm.
to. It's I don't know how effective that is, but it's my attempt to kind of bring those two worlds together, which sometimes do seem really, really separate.
Hmm.
And in ways, when I have colleagues who can talk about their research and I can barely understand, but I talk about my research, and everybody understands it. It's really simple. I study how people write. I mean, very, very straightforward. Um, so I think, I mean, I think you'll agree that there's the function of doing research in some sense, right? There are many, right? It's create new knowledge about what we're curious about, what we need to know. Um, it gives us certain kinds of institutional standing. Sometimes we have to get tenure and promotion, and it informs practices. I mean, I think that I think writing center research is really important because of the ways we need to understand what it is we're doing. I mean, do we know why the model of one-to-one tutoring is most effective, or why peer tutors? I mean, the whole use of peer tutors really started much more with a much more theoretical foundation, and that led to practice. Theory really drove practice, and I think in that case with Ken Bruffy's work.
Yeah.
So I think they're inseparable, but I do agree that sometimes it seems like we're living in two different worlds, with a research world and then a kind of service world. I don't feel, some people feel terrible about being in a position of having to be a service unit, and that service equals servitude. I've never quite felt that. I don't know why that is, because it is a service in a sense. I think of like community service. I have another, so it's about the connotation of the word, right? And I believe deeply in community service. So isn't that what we're doing? What's wrong with that?
And I think that this depend of the writing center director.
Yeah. Yes.
This definitely, because for example, in my writing center, when we are training tutors, we have a tutor training course. And this tutor training course is for selecting who are going to work.
Yep.
Not all that take the course, the class, are going to work in the writing center. And most of them, and if not all of them, are people who are great sense of service because they are work helping another students to write well. So this is something that they need to have, and the director is the first person that need to have this sense of service, because one of the main interests should be improve the writing at the school, at the college, at the university. This is the main reason of the writing center, I think. But in some cases they don't feel, or it depends on the stakeholders. For example, for this. I don't know. You do the same certification of the university.
Yes, accreditation. It's usually called
accreditation. Yes, accreditation. We have accreditation as well, and in some cases, writing centers is just a number to put in this accreditation paper. And yes, that's what sometimes make writing centers directors like
I definitely understand. I mean, in the 3-part teaching service and scholarship that faculty are responsible for, service is the lowest status in every institution I've been part of, and my job as an administrator, that's part of service. So it immediately carries the lowest status as a result, and it takes the most amount of my time too, which is, so I'm being naive, I think, about my reclamation of it, because I understand what the argument is.
But I think this is why it's so important to writing centers directors have had some kind of background on administration skills.
I agree,
because you are administrating a program, a center, or and you are working with people who are in chairs of you, and you have to manage budget sometimes, and a lot of things that if you are just a faculty member, you don't know how to deal with.
It's true. Yeah. I mean, the way I would add to that is not just administrative skills, but leadership skills.
Leadership, yeah.
Because I think writing center directors have opportunities to be leaders at their institutions, on their campuses, in ways that are around the teaching of writing, but can be other. Usually, there are many instances of writing center directors who go on to become deans and provosts and upper administration in some ways, because they have those skills, and they were successful in the writing center because of those skills. So yeah, there's a lot of administrative roles, but more so, I think, cultivating the kind of leadership roles. And I don't mean to leave the writing center, but leading through the writing center, I think, can really be
through the writing center. And in this sense, Dr. Lerner, what do you think would be the desirable preparation to become a writing center director?
Yeah, I think
in an ideal world, what would be desirable?
Yeah, so I think the kind of apprentice or mentoring program is really important. So, for instance, at my institution, I have the writing center director has an assistant director for a year, and it's a graduate. It has an assistant director, and it's a graduate student in our PhD program who plays that role, and it turns over every year. So lots of people will get that opportunity, and that person gets a great training as a writing center director, because he or she is dealing with lots of the kind of day-to-day things.
But they are students of PhD in English?
Yes,
or
in English, yeah.
Just in English?
Yes,
okay.
Yeah, because our writing center is part of the English department.
Okay, perfect.
So that's one way, but that kind of, so even when I was a graduate student and tutoring in a writing center that was not part of an English department, I was able to be on the search committee to hire new tutors, right? So those kind of those aspects that are apart from one-to-one tutoring, those aspects of administration, getting experience and practice in doing those under some sort of guidance, I think is really essential. Some places are creating courses, and that's great. If that works, if there are enough interests. I mean, I tried to offer a writing center course for graduate students this last term, and I didn't get enough students enrolled. I wasn't able to do it. But we have a small grad program, so that's kind of why. So those kind of getting on the job experience without being thrust into the role, I think, is really important. If someone is taking classes that are about writing program administration, I would hope those classes would include something specific to the writing centers and not about writing programs generally, because there definitely are specific needs within writing centers.
Yeah.
That's true. I mean, so what is your background? How did you get prepared for this role?
My minor is, I am a mixture. My minor is in speech and language therapy. And my master's degree is in linguistics, of course, with emphasis in second language learning. And now my PhD is in education, with emphasis in language and education.
Yeah. That's great, but
it's a mixture.
But what about so where did you get the administrative experience? Because none of those degrees education could be. My doctorate's in education. None of it was about administration, because I was studying literacy. So
I was dropping a parachute. Okay, I have no idea about writing centers, because in Colombia there were no writing center. Mine was the first one. I have no neighbors to ask
Yeah.
about, tell me about your experience. What should I do? What should I don't do? And I have nobody to talk with, and I do my research, and okay, let's do this. And I'm
Well,
trying to do my best.
I mean, I heard. So when I was at the Writing Across the Curriculum conference a few weeks ago, and Paula Carlino gave a talk, and it was great. I mean, it's sort of
She
like,
started the fire. She wants to start the
I
fire
mean,
in Latin America.
I liked the way she described it, which was like, we needed to know. So we started this research project, and we needed to know about our students, and we needed to know how they learned, and we needed to know this, and so we
Yeah.
started some research. And I think,
Yes.
coming from that tradition of, well, we have a question, let's do research and try to figure out the answer,
Yes.
makes a lot of
Yes.
sense.
Yes, yes, she's great. She's terrific. She actually she starts the fire in
That's
Latin
great.
America.
That's great.
Um, okay, Dr. Lerner, I want to be respectful with your time. You are so helpful for my research. Yes, it was an interesting
Well,
conversation.
thanks.
I think yes, many interesting things to think deeply for me.
Great. So I'll send you a couple of those pieces I described on that history of writing center directors. But let me know if you have other questions. I'm glad to answer them. Are you going to the IWCA conference in Denver in
No, this
November?
year I was not able to get any funds
That's too bad.
for my university, so no, this year I can't. I hope to go next
Uh-huh.
year, but I don't know. I went to Disney
Uh-huh. Yeah, and I was not there.
and
Yeah.
yeah, and Pittsburgh last year,
Uh-huh. Yeah,
but
I was in Pittsburgh. Yeah, I was at that one.
yeah,
Are you
but this year
are you involved in the Writing Research Across Borders conference? I know that's in Bogota in
yes.
2017.
Yes, I will be. I will be there. I'm in the board that are
Oh, great.
organizing, and I have a conference about a presentation about Latin American Writing Center
Great.
about the result of my survey.
Great.
I'm going to present this and we have a round table with five writing centers directors of five different countries
Great.
working about what are we doing and the way
Oh,
that
that's
we are
great.
doing.
Terrific.
So
Good to do
yes,
that.
are you going? Are you planning
I
to go
don't
to?
think I'm on the organizing board, but I didn't get it together to get a proposal.
No.
So I don't think I'm going to be going.
Yeah,
But
yeah. No,
it's
I
been a
couldn't.
great conference. I've been to all of the ones up to this point, and it's been a great conference. So it should be great.
Yes. Yes, yes. Now that what I'm trying to do is I need to transcripts who is going to be really hard for me. As you have seen, my English is not so good,
Oh, it's very
but and I'm trying to transcribe to take the main points,
okay.
and I have to present a report, but I want to share it with you previously,
Okay.
and you can take you can take a look from this report and give me any comments that you
Okay.
consider.
Will do. Yeah. Great.
Okay. Thank you, Dr.
Okay, Violeta.
Lerner. I
Thank you.
enjoyed our
Me
conversation.
too. Good luck with your
Okay.
research.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye
Have
bye.
a good day. Bye.